Yes, we are going to be in Ruth chapter 1, and we start a new study today finally. I'm excited about it. I hope that you are. After the book of Judges, spending all those weeks and months actually in the book of Judges, and just week after week seeing God's people being disobedient. I mean, it was a great reminder, not necessarily great, but it was a reminder that, yeah, I'm disobedient. But then knowing that God had mercy on those people time and time and time again, that was fantastic. But just reading about people's disobedience every single Sunday, it kind of wore on me. And so I was excited to get to the book of Ruth, finish up the book of Judges, and be in, what's that? For 4 weeks, what? Ruth? Oh, yeah. 4 weeks. Yeah. But at least we get a reprieve here, Ruth. And after Ruth, we'll actually go into some holiday studies. So we won't be in our normal book studies for a little while till the new year. But we are in Ruth today, and a lot of times when I am starting a new book, I will give a background, and sometimes I'll do an entire study, just an introduction, telling you all about what we're going to study. In this case, we will not, and that is because the background or the setting is really given to us as we get into the first chapter. So as we start to read together, I will develop some of those things and share some of that background info with you. I am excited about this book of Ruth, and so Ruth chapter 1 is what we are going to cover today. And what we are going to see in Ruth chapter 1 really is the highlight of the chapter. And there are some low lights. There are some low times in the chapter, like in verse 1. I mean, there's some difficulties. But what is going to, the highlight of the chapter is going to be that love is declared. And love is always a good thing, right? Love is a good thing. Everybody knows, Christian, non-Christian, everybody knows that the world just needs more love. We all understand that. But we'll see love declared here. And this is, for those of you that have some knowledge of the book of Ruth, even if you haven't studied it before, you probably know that this is a love story. It's a romance that is developing. And it's an excellent book. I'm excited about it. It's just 4 chapters, but they are jam-packed, and you'll see that this first chapter is jam-packed. Let's begin by diving right into it in verse 1. And by the way, for those of you that take notes, I do have 3 main divisions. I will reveal those as we go. I didn't put them all on the front page like I normally do. Sorry about that. But what we will start with is death in Moab. And you may be thinking to yourself right now, I thought you said this was a love story. It is. But we're going to see death here in these first 5 verses. Verse 1, though, it says, "Now it came to pass," and here's the time setting, "in the days when the judges ruled." Now again, some of you have been with us on Sunday mornings. You know that we've just finished up the book of Judges. That was, as I told you several times throughout our study, the book of Judges is believed to be 300 to 350 years of, it's a chunk of time during the history of Israel. 300 to 350 years. And it really is one of many dark times in the life of Israel. But it was a time when the judges, they were called, were ruling. And what that means is that God's people, they'd be cooking right along. They'd be doing well. And then they would decide that they were going to be disobedient to God. And then what God would do is he would bring in some foreign army or some foreign people to attack them. And that was a form of discipline. God was disciplining his people. But then the people would turn back to God and say, "God, we're so sorry. Please forgive us." And what God would do is, in order to rescue his people, he would send a judge. He would send a leader, somebody that could come and lead his people out of that judgment, out of that disobedience, and back to the Lord. And as we went through the book of Judges, man, we saw there were some shifty characters, just people that didn't want to be leaders, people that did want to be leaders, and we just saw so many people. There were some godly individuals in there also, but there were so many shifty leaders. I mean, you think about Samson, and it's like, Samson, the guy was just always doing his own thing. not a very good leader at all. But these were the so-called judges that God was using. So it was during those days. And after all I just said to intro, saying that, man, the book of Judges, it wore on me and all those things. In the midst of those dark times, we have this story. And it's a wonderful reminder that even in the midst of trouble and difficulty and darkness in our lives, God is still at work. And that is excellent news. Now, it says here, in the days that the judges ruled, and here's the second thing we learn in verse 1 as far as our setting, that there was a famine in the land. As if things weren't bad enough already, that the people were being disobedient, and they were back and forth with God, and they loved him, and then they hated him, and then they were for him, and then they were against him. As if things weren't hard enough already, there's a famine. Now, no doubt, because this is happening during the time of Judges, my guess, and it's a guess, would be that this famine is probably part of the discipline from God on his people. God probably caused the famine, which we see him do in other books. One of the most notable, or at least one of my favorites, is the book of Haggai, where God is taking away their supplies, trying to discipline them. And so no doubt this famine in the land was part of that discipline. Now, in case you do not know what a famine is when you have a shortage of food. And evidently there was not enough food to feed everybody, because we're introduced to some of the characters in this story here in verse 1. And a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, that's not his name, it's where he's from, Bethlehem in Judah, went to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. Now, why did he go to Moab? Now, he went to Moab, we can gather, because of the famine. He was living in Bethlehem, which was in Israel, which was where he was supposed to be, being part of, God's children, the Israelites. He's supposed to stay there. But because there's a shortage of food, he, for whatever reason, finds out that there's food in Moab, and so he decides, I need to take my wife and my kids to Moab. Now, some Bible teachers, when you're studying through this, sometimes the Bible teachers will say, you know what, shame on this guy. He should have stayed in Israel and just trusted the Lord. And trusting the Lord is always the best thing that you can do. But the question becomes, how do I trust the Lord in this situation? What is the best decision? And I, for one, being a husband, being a dad, cannot fault him for leaving and going to Moab, because he's got a wife and kids that he's trying to provide for. And so he goes, man, there's a shortage of food here, but there's not a shortage of food over there. And so he takes his family and goes over there. And Moab was not a great place for him to go to. It was the home of the land of the Moabites. They had idols, and it was idolatrous, and there were other gods that they worshipped, and things were a mess spiritually over there. But his focus, I believe, is trying to provide for and protect his family. And so I cannot fault him for that. Should he have gone to Moab? Maybe not. I don't know. But he goes where the food is, and that's, again, as having my own family, I cannot fault him for doing that. However, he goes to Moab. Now, what happens in Moab? Verse 2 says, the name of the man was Elimelech. Elimelech. The name of his wife was Naomi. Okay, common name today, somewhat common. Elimelech definitely is not. Hit that cough button. So we have Elimelech in verse 2. The name of his wife was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. Okay, they were Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah, telling us that they were part of God's children, the Israelites. And they went to the country of Moab and remained there. Me, don't know where that came from. Mesaage is what's needed. So we're introduced to 4 characters in this story. We've got Elimelech. Here we go again. Sorry. I don't know. We'll try it one more time. Get that cough drop ready because you may need to slingshot that thing up here. We've got Elimelech, we've got his wife Naomi, and we've got their two boys Mahlon, and Chilion. So four characters introduced that we're introduced to here in verse 2. Now they're in Moab, land of the Moabites. And in verse 3, doesn't take long, then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. Just like that. And she was left and her two sons. Now, we started out with four characters. Already by verse 3, we're down to three characters. Verse 4 says, now they took wives. These are the two sons. Now they took wives of the women of Moab. Now we'll stop there for just a moment, pause briefly, to tell you that whether Elimelech should or should not have gone to Moab to feed his family, that's something that we can argue about. We can say, well, it was a good reason, or I think it was a bad reason, or whatever. But this is definitely a bad result of him going to Moab. And these two sons definitely should not have married Moabite women. The Moabites were idolatrous. They were worshiping, again, other false gods. And this was definitely prohibited by God and by God's word, the law of Moses at this point. They should not have done this. But again, it's a result of living there. It happens. But we know that God is still working, right? In fact, he's just starting out here. Let's read this in verse 4. Now they took wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one, that's the first wife, was Orpah. That's not Ophrah, Winfrey, it's Orpah. And the name of the other, Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years. Now we'll stop there again for just a moment because we have just been introduced to two different women. Now we started out with four people. We lost one of them along the way, but now we've gained two more, so there's five of them. But you'll notice these two women, Orpah, we are told, and we won't see much of her, especially after chapter 1. We won't hear anything about her. But Ruth, interesting. Now this is the Ruth that this book of the Bible is named after. We're reading the book of Ruth. Why is that interesting? Well, it's extremely interesting because this is one of only two books in the entire Bible named after women. Does anybody know what the other book is? Esther. Yes, very good. Esther and Ruth, that's it. What is even more interesting is that this book of Ruth is perhaps the only book, although the book of Luke may be the other one. That's one that people argue about. But this is the only one, or at least one of two, that is named after a Gentile. This woman is not an Israelite. She wasn't born into God's family. She wasn't part of God's people, part of the Israelites. She is a Gentile just straight up. And yet this book, this wonderful book and this wonderful story is named after Ruth. Incredible. Now, it may not seem like that big of a deal to you, but by the time we get to the end of the story, chapter 4, we are going to learn some even more incredible news about Ruth and who she's related to. But we'll learn that. We'll save that for later on. I don't want to be anticlimactic. But welcome to Ruth here as one of our characters, and really the main character in the story. Now it tells us in verse 4 that they dwelt there about 10 years. So you've got Naomi, you've got her two sons. She had her husband, the two daughters. But we see here that in their living. So now it's Naomi, her two sons, and her two daughters-in-law. So the five of them are living here. They're there for about 10 years. Then in verse 5, tragedy strikes again. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died. So the woman survived her two sons and her husband. So she loses her two sons. So we're only 5 verses into this story, which I called a love story. And we started with 6 characters in the story. We're already down to 3. But you and I know that any good love story is always going to have a rough beginning and sometimes tragedy at the beginning. I've got 4 kids that are not kids anymore. They're all older, my youngest being in her mid-20s. But when they were younger, man, we, like many of you did, we watched the Disney movies just over and over again. And it was, her parent, us as parents, we showed our kids, all the classics, but then also, I cannot tell you how many times in my life I have watched Toy Story or Cars. And I'm naming some older movies. For some of you, you're like, oh yeah, those are older. Like we've got you've got your own set of stories. The Little Mermaid. Oh man. And let me tell you how long ago this was. We had it on VHS. Do you know what VHS is? Yeah. Large cassette tape. And my oldest daughter would play that thing. And then as soon as it was done, rewind that thing and start it all over again. And as soon as it was done, rewind that thing and start it. And some of you did the same thing, so don't judge. Okay? Although you didn't have to rewind. You probably just, clicked a button and boom, it immediately restarted. But you get the point. And, in watching so many of those stories, and they were stories, a lot of the stories were stories that I had heard or Disney movies that I had seen when I was young, little, growing up. So many of those stories, especially the princess stories, those types of things. So many times as an adult, I was watching them and thinking, that sounds a lot like a Bible story, You think about Cinderella. The story of Cinderella. Love the story of Cinderella. And Cinderella starts out with tragedy, doesn't it? She loses her parents. She's stuck with her stepmother and those rotten stepsisters of her. And she's living this difficult life. But, and I'm shortening it a lot, but, eventually Prince Charming comes along. But that's oftentimes the storyline in so many of those old stories that we have, those romantic old stories that we have, where you have, this young lady whose life takes a tragic turn, and she's experiencing hardships, but eventually she meets Prince Charming, and I know you, I've walked with you, we know those things, and, and then it ends in this wonderful romantic love story, and they ride off into the sunset together after, of course, he slays the dragon or the bad witch or the whoever it is that he's going after, and they live happily ever after. And I love those stories. But as we start the book of Ruth, it's a familiar story. Everyone is dying, except for Ruth, Naomi, and Orpah. But the other characters have died. Tragedy strikes. But it becomes this wonderful setting for what God is going to do. It starts here in chapter 1 with weeping. It ends in chapter 4 with a wedding. It begins here in chapter 1 with famine, but it will end with fullness. It starts here in chapter 1 with loss. It will end with love. It's a wonderful story, and we have now our setting, and we've been introduced to our main characters, and we will see here as we get into our next main division that these main characters will get narrowed down once again. The cast of characters will get narrowed down again. Here's the next main division, verses 6 through 18. We see decisions are made. And whenever death strikes, those of you that have experienced the death of a loved one, decisions have to be made. Lives are changed. And this story is no different. Now, the first decisions that are made will be made by Naomi in verses 6 through 13. Verse 6 says this: Then she, that's Naomi, arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab. For she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had visited his people by giving them bread. Therefore, in verse 7, she went out from the place where she was, and her daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. So this is the first decision by Naomi. She decides, I've got to leave Moab. She doesn't have a husband there to take care of her anymore. She doesn't have her boys there to take care of her anymore. Evidently, she's an older lady. It's just the three of them. And if some of you may think that life is hard today for women, well, it was much harder back then, especially if you were on your own. And so she decides, she makes this decision, I need to leave the land of Moab. I need to go back to Judah, to Bethlehem. Why would she do that? Well, she heard that there's food over there, the famine's over, but also she would still have family over there. So she's got reasons to go back. Food, which you've got to have in order to survive, and family, which helps a lot when you are trying to survive. Food and family. And so she makes this decision that she's going to go back. Now in verse 7, it's a little confusing because it says, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. Now perhaps they started out that way, but something changes. Verse 8. Here's Naomi's next decision. Verse 8. And Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, to her two daughters-in-law, go return each of you, each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. So she decides, daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, it is going to be best for you to just go back to your house. Now they're in Moab, and what she's telling them is, look, don't come with me to Judah. You should just go back to your mom. Just go back to your family's house. Now, why is she saying that? She's saying that because, as we will find out, and we'll read this together, we're going to find out, Naomi's thinking, I got nothing to offer you ladies. I've lost my husband and my two sons, and she even believes that she's lost God. God's against me, is what she's going to say. And he's punishing me, and you shouldn't come with me. You should go back to your house. Now, she's going to give them some compelling reasons to go back to their families. Let's look at it. Verse 9, she says, the Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband. In other words, go back to your homes and remarry. So she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. She kissed who? She kissed her daughters-in-law. They were about to part. And she's saying, go back, remarry, have a happy life. May the Lord bless you and, grant you rest, and may he be with you. And they kiss, and they're about to part. But in verse 10, they said to her, surely we will return with you to your people. No way, Naomi. We love you. We're going back with you, back to your land. We're going to go and be part of your family. But Naomi said in verse 11, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb that they may be your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go. For I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband tonight and should even bear sons, would you wait for them till they were grown? Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? No, my daughters, for it grieves me very much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Now, what she's saying to her daughters-in-law is, listen, don't go with me. Because coming with me, she says, is hopeless. She says, I'm too old to remarry. And even if I did get remarried, what do you think? I'm going to have two more sons? And then even if I got remarried tonight, like right now, and I ended up having two more sons, what are you going to do? You're going to wait until they grow old enough and you're going to stick around so that you can remarry back into the family? She's saying that's silly, and it certainly sounds silly to us. Well, yeah, okay, that doesn't make any sense. And so she's telling them, you need to just go back to your family and just, restart your lives over. You're young enough, you can remarry, go back to your land. No, there's no need for you to come. And then also, lastly, in verse 13, she says, it grieves me very much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Now, we are not told. You can guess all you want. We are not told how her husband died or how her sons died. Was it accidental? Was it sickness? Did they get mixed up in some kind of trouble? We're never told. So it makes no sense to guess. Whatever it was that has taken place, it may be just the fact that her husband and her two boys died. Maybe it was purely natural, sickness, whatever it was, but they died. Because of that, Naomi is convinced that God is against her. She says, the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. You know, that is not uncommon at all, and it is absolutely so normal. I can't speak for Naomi specifically, but my guess is, and the reason I'm guessing this is because this is what many people believe. This is how many people think. That if bad things are happening to me, that means that God is against me. It's this. It's almost like this points system. Like, you know what? If I'm good, then God will only do good things to me. And if bad things happen, that must mean that God's against me. Maybe I've been doing wrong things, or, I'm not earning enough points or whatever. It's a merit system oftentimes. Whatever it was that was going through Naomi's mind, she's thinking, hey, God's against me. All of these difficulties are taking place. And so she's discouraged, and she's saying, there's no reason for you to go with me. Now, you and I have the benefit of being able to sit down and, probably within about 20 minutes, you could read the entire story. We have that benefit. Naomi, at the time that these things were happening, did not have the benefit of looking into the future and saying, oh, everything's going to turn out fine. She was stuck in the middle of that and trying to make sense of it all, and none of it was making sense. All she could see was, God's against me. This is a familiar place, and it's not necessarily a bad place to be in. I'll explain why. When God wants to remake a person, he will first take that person and then break that person. What I'm saying is that when God wants to do something new in us, he will oftentimes have to get us to a place where we are surrendered to that, where we say, okay, God, I'll let you do whatever it is that you want to do. And oftentimes, when everything is going well, it's hard to let go of that. And we may not necessarily be willing to let go and let God do whatever he wants because, hey, God, don't mess this up. I really like the way that my life is right now. So don't go shaking nothing up. And so oftentimes God has to get us to a place where we release, we stop white-knuckling, our lives, where we release that to God so that he can get us to a place where we are now willing to say, okay, God, I'll let you do whatever you want to do. That happened to me when I was 20 years old. 20 years old. I did not grow up in a Christian home. My dad was saved when I was in high school. So then he came home preaching to me, and I was like, dude, I don't need to hear all of that mess. Get away. I'm trying to party it up. I don't need to hear all that. But that happened to me where through my high school years and late high school years, and then at the time I was 20, and I'm shortening the story a lot, but I got myself involved in all kinds of mess. But God was patient, and he got me to this place at 20 years old where I was not working. I was flunking my college classes and found out that I had a baby on the way. So I was in this place where I was in this backed into a corner that God got me into, so that the only thing I had at that point, and the only one that liked me, I think, at that time in my life, was God. And so I found myself going, man, I've already tried everything else. Tried the party, I've tried the relationships, I've tried the crime, I've tried the whatever, all the different things. It's all, here I am, I'm empty, I've got nothing, and so I had no place to look. You know, you've heard the story, or the saying, when you're down, when the only, I don't know, I'm messing it up now in my mind, but when you're left with, hey, the only way to go is up, is what I was trying to think. That's not necessarily a bad place. You go, well, I'm at the bottom. Well, the only way is, to go is up. With God, that's always going to be true. When you find yourself without things, all your focus is turned to God. And so you can say to him, you know what, I surrender. God, I'll do whatever you want to do. And Naomi doesn't know it yet, but God is getting her to that place. It's difficult, though. I'm standing on it's a fairly nice rug. I mean, it's kind of beat up now, and needs to be shampooed and all those kinds of things. But it's a fairly nice rug. If you were going into the store looking for a rug and you saw this, you might go, oh, okay, yeah, that's kind of nice. Maybe I'll get that. It's kind of like the one at church or whatever. I like it. But if you were to walk into the store and you were to see the back of this, you would go, that doesn't really make sense to me. If you saw the person weaving this rug, and you come in, you look, and you're looking, and you're like, what is that? And all you can see is the back. It's not going to make any sense. You're going to go, I don't think that's going to be a very nice rug. And why is that? Why would we think that? Well, because we haven't seen the other side, because the work's not done yet. You've got to wait until the artist is done. And then see what that artist has done. See the finished work. Naomi's not there. All she can see is the back of that rug, and it's not making sense to her. And so the discouragement has set in. Now, in verse 14, we see the next person to make some decisions, and that is Orpah. And it's just verse 14. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. I won't say anything about women being emotional, okay? I'm not going to say it because I don't want to get myself in trouble. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Now, it does not expressly say here what Orpah's decision was. That will become very clear in verse 15, and you can look at verse 15 if you want right now. But what Orpah has just decided is she is going to do what Naomi told her to do. She's going to go back to her family and hopefully get remarried. And so in the kissing of her mother-in-law, that's what they're doing. It's a parting kiss. This would have been very difficult, you must understand. Keep in mind, there was no means of communication outside of face-to-face. I mean, you could send a message back and forth to one another. But imagine that, trying to travel between countries. That's so difficult. Without a modern postal service like we have, and even the postal service now has a hard time getting your letters where they need to go. Back then, for these two women, Orpah and her mother-in-law, to be kissing and saying goodbye, that means lifelong. They're never going to see each other again. So it makes sense why they would be weeping again, why this would be so emotional. And so Orpah decides that she's going to go back to her family. And that will actually, verse 14, will be the last time that we ever hear or see Orpah. We don't know what happened to her. Beginning at verse 15 down to verse 18, we now see that Ruth is making a decision. In verse 15, this is Naomi speaking. Naomi says, and she said, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. He says, Orpah has left. She went back. Listen, Ruth, just go back to your family. What happens next elevates Ruth to the current position that we hold Ruth to. We say, man, that woman, she was a godly woman, wonderful woman. Look what she says in verse 16. But Ruth said, entreat me not to leave you. She says, I'm begging you not to send me away. Begging. That's what entreating means. I'm begging you not to send me away. Or turn back from following after you. Please don't stop me from following you. For wherever you go, I will go. And wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. She says, I'm I'm giving up this Moabite life. I'm going with you. I'm begging you. Please don't turn me away. Please don't try to stop me. And then she goes even further. Verse 17, where you die, I will die. She says, that's it. Naomi, I'm yours for life. Everybody is familiar with the phrase, my ride or die. And you know that what that means. That means that's your homie. Like they got your back no matter what. And it's like to the grave, to the death. And that's what she's saying. She's saying, I'm going with you. I'm going to spend the rest of my life with you. So please don't try to stop me. She says in verse 17, where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. I'm going to even be buried in the same place as you. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. Well, she just literally pronounced a curse on herself. She said, listen, if we part before death, may God curse me. May God kill me. May God punish me. She says, there's no way you're going to be able to chase me away. I'm following you to the grave. It's a wonderful expression of love. And it says in verse 18, when she saw that she was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her. That doesn't mean that she got mad. Naomi's like, you know what? I'm not talking to you anymore. That's not what happened. It means that she stopped trying to convince her. She says, forget it. This woman, Ruth, she's committed, dedicated. There's no way I'm going to turn her away. It doesn't make any sense to try and convince her otherwise. That's what happened there. This is a wonderful picture of love here between these two women. Obviously, some familial love. These family members that love one another. And it's interesting and it's exciting because they're not blood relatives, right? Ruth was married into the family. It reminds me of my family. My mom went home to heaven 21 years ago. And she got sick. She got something called Lou Gehrig's disease, and she was sick for a few months. Actually, it moved extremely fast. If you know anything about Lou Gehrig's disease, it's a very slow-moving disease. But God was very gracious, very merciful to her, and it only lasted a few months, several months, but she was gone within a year's time. But during that time, she needed a lot of care. Lou Gehrig's disease causes, it's basically your body attacking itself, and the brain stops communicating with the rest of the body. So you lose the use of your limbs. You can't use your body. You're stuck inside of your body. It's essentially like being paralyzed, but very slowly over a long period of time. And so there were many things, as you can imagine. If somebody's paralyzed, there's things that they cannot do. Right? They cannot get themselves to the restroom. They can't get to the shower. They can't just go out and pick up the mail. And so she found herself stuck in a bed. She was bedridden. And everybody pitched in to take care of her, even aunts and uncles and different things. But there were two people that were really there the most. My sisters were there a lot. I was there, but I wasn't there as much as them. But really, it was my wife. And then I remember, and my sisters also, but I've got two sisters, but I always tell people I have three sisters. And the reason I tell them that is because years ago when one of my sisters, was in college, she came home for Thanksgiving holiday. And she walked in with a white girl. Look at me, I'm dark, man. I'm so brown. And my family is, they're not nobody in my family is as dark as me. But, she walks in. But you know what? The color of her skin didn't matter. We would joke about it all the time, back and forth. But we just accepted her right into the family. She just became part of the family. I mean, she was never officially adopted, but still to this day, we consider her to be our sister. And, so her not being a blood relative, and then my wife not being a blood relative, she was married into the family, but not being a blood relative, but they loved my mom. And my mom just loved everybody. She was one of those women, just loved everybody. But they loved her so much that they were there to care for her and to do all of those things for my mom that needed to be done. Bathroom, shower, all those things. an itchy foot, whatever it might have been. They were there so much. They spent so much time over there ministering to her. And so I always think about that when I think about this story of Ruth. You have this woman, Ruth, going, no, Naomi, no, you can't shake me. That's it. We're connected. We're let's go. We're, till the day that we die, let's go. And she was committed to her mother-in-law. Now, let's move into our third and final main division. Let me get it up there for you if we can. And it is discouraged in Bethlehem. Discouragement or discouraged in Bethlehem. Now in verse 19 it says, now the two of them went until they came to Bethlehem. And it happened when they had come to Bethlehem that all the city was excited because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? Naomi's back. But she said to them, do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. Everybody's excited to see her. But the discouragement has set in. Naomi's only seen the back of the tapestry, the back of the carpet. She doesn't understand yet what God's doing. And so she shows up back home, but she's so discouraged. And in fact, she says, listen, I'm changing my name. Don't call me Naomi anymore. Naomi means pleasant. She says, don't call me pleasant anymore. Call me Mara. Mara means bitter. Mara means bitter. And interestingly enough, Mara sounds like Amaro. That's my last name, Amaro. Which also means bitter. Yeah, it does. You could fact check that. It does. It's Italian and it means bitter. In fact, if you look up Amaro, you'll see pictures of a bitter Italian wine is what it is. And if you knew my family where I came from, you'd go, yeah, it's not a mistake. Anyhow, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. So she says, man, God's against me. I've lost my husband, I've lost my sons. My other daughter-in-law is gone, which she sent her away. But she says, even God's against me. I've got nothing. Verse 21, she says, I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty. I went out with a full family. I'm coming back with no husband, no sons. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has afflicted me, she says. Again, she doesn't understand. She doesn't understand what God is doing. And then finally in verse 22, so Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. Now they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. And that's the end of chapter 1. And what a way to end chapter 1. They get there. I mean, sadness, grief, discouragement. But then you get this one little line here. They came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. Oh. Sounds like one of those Lifetime movies, that come on during the holidays. Woman shows up in town, and she's just, down and out or whatever, it's like, it's, new chapter of life or whatever, and, this is what's happened. And then she meets the handsome guy, oh, by the way, and he just happens to own his own farm, and he's a millionaire, and his grandpa was a billionaire or whatever, and, you know the story, the story. I see those once in a while around my house. I don't watch them because I'm so manly, right? Sometimes I'll catch myself watching, like I'll be walking through and my wife's watching and it's like, stop, like, what? Girl, don't, listen. But doesn't it, listen, now they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. In other words, they get there just as the seasons are changing. Man, barley harvest is about to start. It's a big deal. We'll find that out in the story as we continue on to the other chapters. But barley harvest. Yes. Perfect setting for a love story. I've already told you that this is one of two books named after a woman. I also mentioned that it's one of two books named after a Gentile. If in fact Luke was a Gentile, which many people believe he was and whatever. One of only two books named after a Gentile. Here's another interesting fact about this story. Everybody knows, everybody could tell you, this is a romance. And it's about to be set off. As soon as we get into chapter 2, it's going to become very obvious. But we have already seen some love expressed between people, this mother-in-law with her daughters-in-law and vice versa. And everybody knows that it's a love story. But interestingly, the word romance is never mentioned in the book. Not once. And even more interesting, the word love is never mentioned in the book. And yet, how do we know that it's a love story? Did we see love expressed in chapter 1? We did. And if I were to say, well, how did you know it was love? Well, they used their words to express to one another, and they said, listen, I'm committed to you in so many words, and I'm sticking with you, and we saw the weeping. All of these things are indicative of love. It's obvious they loved one another. It's a wonderful reminder that love is not just a word, right? It's how it starts. We say, I love you, but the actions, what I do, the care, the concern that I show someone, right? That's how we know. And that's why this is a romance story, a love story. Now, for those of you that like to take notes and you want some breakdown, I see a very easy pattern in these 4 chapters. And this is where we'll end. Chapter 1, we've just seen it. Love is declared. They declared their love for one another. In chapter 2, we will see that love demonstrated. The love that Ruth expressed for Naomi, we will see her act on that love. She'll prove it. And then in chapter 3, again, we'll see love declared between the man and the woman. The romance. And that love declared will appear to be quite scandalous, which it isn't, but the way that it happens could be considered scandalous. But then we go back to love demonstrated in chapter 4. So the love that's declared in chapter 1 is shown in chapter 2. It's demonstrated. And then there's a new love in chapter 3 that's declared. And then in chapter 4, that new love is demonstrated. And so love declared, love demonstrated, love declared, love demonstrated, and that will be, our story throughout the book of Ruth. I'm excited to go through it with you. I hope that all of you will be excited with me and show up on Sundays to hear the entire story. Before we pray, we've got a fall festival.